A deadly duel. Enemies for decades. Israel and Iran are at war. A fresh wave of attacks rained down overnight in Israel and in Iran. At least 10 people have killed, but the situation is moving fast. We will speak live this morning to Israel's ambassador here in the UK, and we'll have the latest from Iran's capital, Tehran. British jets are on the way to the region. We'll explore what that means for us. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and our opposite number, Mel Stride, for the Conservatives, are both here. We'll hear too today from the son of the former Shah of Iran. This morning, he's calling for his fellow countrymen to rise up and take to the streets. And our team at the desk for the next hour this week, renowned international journalist Christiane Amanpour, former boss of the oil giant Lord Brown from BP, and Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, Green campaigner. Morning. And first of all, we want to show you straight away what's happening on the ground in the Middle East. This is Tamra, a city in northern Israel where one person was killed overnight by Iranian strikes. This is Beit Am, where 3 people died last night. And there were more attacks in Iran too. We haven't been able to get pictures of those so far. But a major oil depot has been hit, along with more military sites, as Israel continues its efforts to weaken the Iranian regime. This bitter new outburst of war dominates the headlines this morning. The Sunday Times says that Britain is on a war footing, moving combat jets to the Middle East. The Observer carries a dramatic picture of the skies over Tel Aviv on Friday night. The Sun and The Independent both splash on British jets being sent to the area. But The Independent also has an image of the jubilant Bath team winning the rugby premiership for the first time in nearly 30 years. And on any other day, the Prime Minister granting a national inquiry into grooming gangs, having resisted it, would be on front pages everywhere. It leads the Sunday Telegraph today. But as you imagine, today we're going to spend most of our time speaking about the Middle East. Christiane, in all your years of experience covering this region, how would you classify this moment with Iran and Israel in direct conflict?
Well, obviously, it's the first major time that these two, who've been in a shadow war with each other for a long time, have come out, and it's really, a big deal. It's not an equal. Israel is much further superior to Iran. Israel has been degrading Iran's capabilities since October 7th, and that is a big factor. It's been degrading its proxies in the region. I think also, very importantly, Prime Minister Netanyahu has wanted to do this for decades. He's never believed in the diplomatic path. No American president has allowed him to do it until President Trump. So the question is, what next? Where does this go? And what is the ultimate strategy and the ultimate goal?
And in terms, Lord Brown, for us here watching on in the UK, there is, of course, a horror looking at conflict and, of course, with loss of life and all the instability in that particular region. But at home, what could the direct impacts be if this is prolonged?
Well, setting aside the broad security issues, it is energy security, the price of oil, and therefore the price of petrol at the pump. So there's a lot of oil in the world. We have more than enough oil capable of being produced because OPEC restrains their production to keep the price up a bit. But the issue is getting it to market. And the concern is the Straits of Hormuz, in the Arabian-Persian Gulf, and whether or not that can be blocked. I think it's unlikely because it cuts off the nose to spite the face. Iran is still producing 1.7 million barrels a day of exportable oil as well as natural gas. And so I think it's unlikely, but the risk is there, and that's why the price has already gone up a bit. People saying it may happen, it may not happen. I would expect the price to equilibrate a bit. If they shut the Straits of Hormuz, the price, I don't know where the price would go. It would certainly go up a long way.
Hugh, what have you thought watching some of the images coming out?
Well, the images are horrific, but one of the things I've been thinking about is the story that for the first time is the Middle Eastern story that for the first time isn't really on the front pages, and that's the people of Gaza, because, of course, this is an absolute disaster for them. At a time when international concern about the mounting atrocities of innocent civilians being slaughtered in their food queues, was really beginning to shake loose some sense that now is the moment to really push Israel very hard, take action. Maybe in the case of the UK, even withdraw military support and military training, which personally I think we should have done a long time ago. And then today, or yesterday, the Saudi-Paris summit, the Saudi-French summit on the statehood of Palestine has been postponed indefinitely. Just for the last few days, Gaza has been in a complete communications blackout, as if things couldn't be any worse. This is just catastrophic, and I think we need to spare a thought for them too today.
Well, events have been moving so quickly, so let's just take a bit of a breath and remind you of exactly what has been going on. This week's strikes are Israel's biggest ever attacks on Iran, but the two countries have been enemies for decades. Iran's regime calls for the destruction of Israel and backs violent groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. Israel believes Iran wants to develop a nuclear bomb and says it's an existential threat. Now it's carried out the biggest attack on Iran in decades, killing military leaders and scientists and targeting nuclear sites. Iran's hit back, bombing Israel's cities too, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. An outburst of conflict that could have heavy costs for us all. Well, the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, is here with us this morning. Welcome to the studio. Good morning. This is a dramatic escalation in the long burning, simmering enmity between Israel and Iran. Why won't you heed calls from the UK and others to de-escalate, to stop?
Because de-escalation means that Iran won't have nuclear capabilities. It's as simple as that. The UK has been our partner for many years to fight Iran's nuclear ambitions. Everyone agrees, the US, the UK, other allies, that Iran with nuclear capabilities will be devastating to the region, including the Gulf countries. Now, we are in a point where President Trump gave 60 days of negotiation to the Iranians to give a diplomatic solution, and the Iranians didn't really want to have any diplomatic solution. They were actually, when the IAEA published this report that was clearly showing that Iran was misleading the international community, enriching uranium. And we saw, with our intelligence abilities, that they were racing fast to get nuclear bombs with the combination of enrichment and weaponization. When all this happened, we had to move fast to operate against Iran's nuclear ambitions.
But let me tell people also what the Director of Intelligence of the United States said very clearly recently. We continue to assess that Iran is not yet building a nuclear weapon. Israel has faced ongoing threats from Iran for many years.
Laura?
There was no imminent threat.
There was imminent threat, and can I please ask you something? We both are not nuclear experts, but I think everyone knows that in order to have an enrichment of uranium, you need to have, for your civil capabilities, it's enough to have 3.5%. And they were enriching beyond 60%. So what do you think was their aim?
And yet the assessment from the United States was that as things stand, Iran has not at this point been building a nuclear weapon. There was, in that regard, no imminent threat. And there were talks due today.
There was an imminent threat. I beg to differ. You're definitely not in line with the fact that the Iranians were both creating this program to destroy Israel, to eliminate Israel. And you know something? After 7th of October, if there is one thing we learned, when our enemies are saying clearly they want to eliminate Israel and they are preparing the capabilities, and I think the IAEA report is quite clear about that, then we should believe them. And Israel here was acting in act of self-defense.
But you were
and it was an imminent threat.
But you were acting 3 days before diplomatic talks were scheduled. They were meant to be happening today. There was that option. And instead of giving another 3 days where there could have been a chance at resolving this without bloodshed, without attacks on civilians, your own civilians overnight, now being attacked and losing their lives.
No, let me tell
Why
you
was
something.
Israel unable to give another 3 days before striking like this?
First of all, the 60 days been expired. And we saw that Iran has no intentions to get into a diplomatic solution here. They've been doing what they've been doing for the last 20 years. They were clear that they want to have a nuclear weapon. And, you know, Israel knows how this thing can be dangerous because we operated in the past. Our history shows twice we operated. 1981, we operated against Iraq, and 2007, we operated against the nuclear aspirations of Assad in Syria. Both times, the international community owes huge thank you to Israel. And it's the same case here. Europe owes a huge thank you to Israel for doing that, and the Gulf countries as well. Our region would have been a place that is not safe for anyone if Iran would have accomplished their plan.
What is your ultimate intention here? Are you trying to overthrow the Iranian government by force? Because you haven't just been attacking nuclear facilities, you have taken out, you have killed senior military figures. Are you trying to overthrow their regime by force?
Our Prime Minister was very clear. We were not aiming to regime change. This is not the aim of this military operation. We are clear about harming and damaging in a way that will create a total rollback to Iran's nuclear program. This is our aim. And we are also aiming to destroy the ballistic missiles program. Now, you've seen the damage created yesterday. We're talking about civilians being targeted. Israel is not targeting civilians while Iran is targeting.
But civilians have been killed in Iran. Civilians have been killed.
We are talking about Israel calling the Iranian people to evacuate. We're not seeing the same coaches from the Iranian people, Iranian regime. Actually, what we're seeing is targeting communities in the center of Israel. My parents live in the city that was hurt yesterday. Now, I was talking to my father and to my mother, 3 o'clock in the morning Israel time, and their whole house was shaking. And they had to go to their shelter. They're in their 70s. We're talking about children
that is retaliation to strikes by Israel. That is retaliation from Iran.
Can I remind you, April and October, 300 missiles and UAVs being targeting Israeli civilians time after time from the Iranian regime. Israel has been tolerating this for too long, and the world has been tolerating this for too long, and I think the world would be a much better place without Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Civilians have already died on both sides. Reportedly, more than 70 people have been killed by Israeli strikes in Tehran. You have, on this occasion, directly started this conflict with a deadly foe. Tens and tens of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza. You will not put the brakes on there, despite repeated calls from your allies around the world, including the UK government. You've been accused by the United Nations of atrocities. Will Benjamin Netanyahu stop at nothing? Is he listening to anyone?
Our Prime Minister is being backed up by all the opposition leaders in Israel. This is not a political decision of one leader that is making a decision for his own interest. This is a decision for the safety of Israel, the region, and the world for the coming many years. And I want to say about the end game, and I think this is what people care about. Actually, I believe that it gives better opportunity to get to a ceasefire in Gaza, because once the patron of Hamas, all the proxy system that Iran has built around Israel, this vicious plan to invade Israel and to barbarically kill our people through Hezbollah, through the Houthis, and through Hamas, this will stop once Iran won't have the capabilities and the ability to sponsor terrorism all around the world and around Israel. And I believe, actually, we're getting closer to the opportunity that Hamas will understand that it must, finally bring our hostages back and make sure that the war in Gaza will stop.
Okay, Ambassador, thanks so much for giving us your time.
Thank you. Hoping for,
thank you very much
indeed for a safer world.
Thank you very much for coming in. Let's now hear then from Tehran. We did approach the Iranian government for one of their spokespeople. They were not able to give us an interview. So instead, we spoke to Hamidreza Gholamzadeh, the director of Diplo House, a think tank, about the UK's government decision to send RAF jets to the Middle East and whether or not that makes the UK a target for Iran.
They have not been involved yet. By just sending the fighter jets doesn't mean that they are involved. But if they are involved, there certainly would be a legitimate target for Iran. Iran has been very clear at this time that any country that supports Israelis and gets involved in either defending the Israelis or attacking Iran would be a legitimate target for that. And Iran doesn't have any joke with that. It's very serious about that because it has turned into an existential war for Iran. Because Israelis have passed a red line that is very serious, and there is no return for that. And Iran is going to defend itself by any means and any ways. And any country, even the Americans, the UK, or any country who supports the Israelis would be a legitimate target for Iran.
So Iran is threatening the UK?
If they are involved. So if they don't get involved, so there is no war. It's about security. It's a war. If you get involved in a war, so that's what you have chosen. If UK chooses to get into the war, so that would be the price that it needs to pay. But if there is no involvement, so no, there is no threat at all.
What is it like in Tehran today after the strikes overnight?
The general feeling inside the country is unity and support for the retaliation measures by the government. And that's the anger that people are showing toward the Israeli regime.
Some opposition figures would say the opposite. They would say for a very long time, people have been deeply unhappy with the Iranian regime and their refusal to show the international community what they're really doing with nuclear material is what has led to this.
There are some voices, but they are very minor. So those who, like you, would like to call Iranian regime are very minor. There are many opposition figures. Even those who have been, for example, in prison in the past, have been involved in the developments 2 or 3 years ago, or in 2009, and many of those figures have actually united the others and have shown solidarity with the government, and they have all standing for Iran.
Well, the Iranian government has brutally repressed, of course, many of the people who have tried to criticize it. But why will Iran not come clean to the world about its nuclear program? They've been formally found to be in breach of their obligations by the United Nations. And for many years, they have not been completely open about what is going on.
It depends on how we judge Iranian performance. Iran has been undergoing the most, let's say, the biggest inspection regime by the IAEA for many years, since the JCPOA before that and after that. Iran has been under serious inspections, something much more than the regular inspections that the IAEA is supposed to carry out. But the politicization of the situation by the IAEA has made it difficult. So according to the charter of the IAEA and the regulations of the NPT, Iran has been following all the rules and all the obligations that it was supposed to do. But by politicizing the dossier and claiming that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, the IAEA has been actually deviating from what its nature of activity is supposed to be. So there is no proof that Iran has been following that. And actually, other way around, there has been many reports and proofs that Iran has not been pursuing nuclear weapons.
The fact is that a neutral international body has found Iran to be in breach for the first time of its obligations when it comes to nuclear materials. And the United States, you quote there their intelligence, the United States intelligence director has said that what Iran is doing is unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons. So why should anyone believe that Iran is not trying to create a nuclear weapon or does not have ambition to create nuclear weapons, which of course Israel sees as an existential threat?
According to the charter of the IAEA, Iran, as a member of the NPT, has the right to enrich uranium. And that's a legal right that Iran has. If there is any claim that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, they need to prove that. It's not possible to prove something that doesn't exist. If the Americans, the IAEA, the Europeans, whoever claims that Iran is pursuing one, needs to provide documents for that, needs to provide evidence for that.
I would just remind viewers that Iran has been found in breach by the international authority and not coming clean about its nuclear program. And it is the Iranian government's stated aim to try to destroy Israel. Isn't it quite understandable then that they have been seeking to destroy any nuclear facilities the country has?
It doesn't necessarily mean that Iran is pursuing a nuclear bomb. And if Iran has not been clear in some aspects of nuclear activities, which I do not accept that, is pursuing a nuclear bomb because of that. No, if they claim, if IAEA or the E3 claim that Iran is pursuing one, they need to provide the documents for that. They need to provide evidence for that.
Hamidreza Gholamzadeh speaking to us from Tehran. Well, this burgeoning conflict is on the agenda for international leaders gathering in Canada today. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is there, and he had time to catch up with Mark Carney, the Canadian leader, over a beer last night. Probably a needed one, because there might be efforts to cool the situation down, not least because of the effect that it might have on the economy when money for public services and the government's cash is already tight. Let's then talk to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who's with us this morning. Thank you for coming into the studio. Let's start with this situation. Why is the UK sending jets to the Middle East?
To protect our personnel and bases who are based in the region. That's why we're sending assets, including jets. But Keir Starmer was very clear yesterday, and will be at the G7, that we are urging de-escalation. We're very concerned about what is happening, the implications for the region, but also the implications for the rest of the world. And so very much the message that the Prime Minister is taking to the G7 this week is to encourage calm heads and talks and not further escalation of this conflict.
And can you tell us where the jets are going? Are they going just to British
I'm
bases
not going
in
to
Cyprus,
comment.
Or are they going
I'm not going to comment on operational matters. Things are obviously very fast moving, but we do have personnel, we do have bases in the region, and it is right, given everything that's happening, that we send additional assets there as a precautionary measure.
And might the UK support and help Israel attacking Iran? And just to be clear with people watching this morning, on some occasions, previously on a couple of occasions, the UK has helped Israel when they have been attacked by Iran. Will the UK help Israel this time?
Well, the second thing that we have done in the past is defend Israel from attacks. We have never we've never been involved in attacking with Israel. I think those two things are very different, but I'm not going to comment on what may or may not happen. This is a very fast-moving situation. We do believe that Israel has a right to defend itself. We are very concerned around Iran's nuclear ambitions. That would be incredibly dangerous for Britain and the rest of the world if Iran were to develop a nuclear weapon. And so we share those concerns, and we share the concerns as well of the IAEA, who have been very clear in their report. And it's very disappointing that Iran has not cooperated fully with the IAEA.
But Chancellor, do you believe, as the Israeli ambassador believed very clearly and very firmly, she claimed that Iran presented an imminent threat to Israel? Do you agree with that?
We are very concerned around the nuclear weapons programme, but our plea to both sides and to all those involved is to de-escalate. That is the priority right now, because de-escalation is what is necessary to make progress on a whole range of issues and to protect people in the region, but also more widely. You know, we've seen civilian deaths in Israel overnight, indiscriminate attacks from Iran on Israel. I am very concerned about what is happening, and that's why our focus is on de-escalation.
But you are also sending jets to the region. I think a lot of people watching might wonder, that's a bit contradictory, saying, oh, calm things down, but actually moving military assets to that part of the world.
But we have personnel and we have bases in the region, and it is our duty as a government to protect our personnel and our bases. We have military personnel in the Middle East. It would be a dereliction of duty on our part if we weren't doing everything that was needed to protect those. It is a fast-moving situation, and it is absolutely right, as a precautionary measure, that we send additional assets, including jets, to the region. That's the right thing to do. I think it's what people would expect us to do, given how fast-moving the situation is.
And what would your advice be to British people who are in the region?
Well, to follow the Foreign Office advice, that is likely as well to change as the situation on the ground changes. So I would encourage people to look at the Foreign Office advice. There already has been advice given, but to continue following that based on the latest developments.
Why this is relevant, particularly to you as Chancellor, of course, and to people watching at home, is, as we've been talking about with Lord Brown, if this becomes a prolonged conflict, there are implications for the price of oil. Now, I just want to show people actually on the screen what happened to the price of oil when this news broke. You can see That then actually is what happened before when Russia invaded Ukraine. I was going to make the comparison because this is what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine. It turned into a prolonged conflict. And what we saw was a spike in the oil price and then, of course, a surge in the bills that people had to pay in their energy prices at home. How concerned are you that that might happen again?
Obviously monitoring this very closely as the government. You can see from the chart that energy prices, oil prices are still lower than they were at the start of this year, but there's absolutely no complacency from myself or the Treasury. And as well, the concerns are around shipping routes, both for oil and gas exports, but also more widely because so much goods trade passes through the Middle East. So obviously we're following this closely. It's one of the reasons, Laura, that we are urging de-escalation, because obviously the impact on the region of the Middle East is immense, but the impacts on all of us are immense. We've seen in the last few years that things that unfold far from our borders have huge implications for the UK. And let me just add this. It's one of the reasons why this week in the spending review, we announced additional money for defence to take it up to 2.6% of GDP within 2 years, but also investing in our energy security at home, because we've found in recent years that a lack of investment in our own domestic energy production has left us exposed. And so the investment in nuclear energy, in offshore wind or in onshore wind, in carbon capture and hydrogen is all about ensuring that we are more self-sufficient as a nation in something which is absolutely essential for our everyday lives. Energy security is increasingly national security, which is why there was substantial investment in energy security last week.
And that's something that you promised to do, and it's something that you seem to be, following through on with lots and lots of extra cash, but that will not have an impact potentially for many, many years to come.
Well, some of it
so if we end up in a similar situation to what happened in Ukraine, the Conservative government then stepped in and paid everybody's energy bills. Is that something that you might be willing to consider if we end up in that situation?
Well, first of all, some of what we're doing will have an impact in the shorter term. So, for example, we put substantial investment last week into home insulation to take £600 off the bills of millions of families in Britain, focusing on those on lower incomes, because, again, one of the challenges in the last few years is people's energy bills are very high because so many homes are poorly insulated. So some of this could have an impact in quite a short term. But, I'm not going to take anything off the table. We're not anywhere near that stage at the moment. Indeed, in July, average energy bills are going to come down by about £100 a year. That is very welcome news. And the price of petrol at the pumps is significantly lower than it was at the start of the year. But as I said in the earlier part of this interview, things are moving rapidly,
and as
a government, we'll follow that closely and always do everything in our power to protect ordinary working people in this country.
And things are moving very, very quickly, and as if we needed a reminder that the world is currently very volatile. Do you admit that if this becomes a prolonged conflict, that the carefully presented numbers that you put forward in your spending review a few days ago, that just blows it all out of the window? There are already lots of experts saying, actually, your sums don't really add up and you're probably going to have to put taxes up already.
Well, we're a strong economy with strong foundations, and we have weathered other shocks, including earlier this year when President Trump announced those global tariffs, and people said, oh, Britain won't be able to get a deal, this is going to be devastating. Well, we did get a deal with the United States. We are still the only country to have secured a deal with the United States. And in addition, we've got trade deals with India and the EU. So we are working hard as a government to strengthen our economy, to grow our economy in a way that creates good jobs here in Britain, paying decent wages, to put more money in people's pockets.
But you can't deny that you have left yourself relatively little room for manoeuvre in the way that you set out your spending plans for the years ahead. And one of our viewers, Ashley, has noticed this very much and has a question for you. Ashley wants to know, under your stewardship, debt costs are up, tax is up, unemployment is up. Why do you think the economy has failed to show material improvement? Some people might think there's quite a straightforward answer to that, is that in April, you slapped billions of pounds of extra tax on businesses who are the people who get the economy to grow.
Well, it was the decisions we made on tax last year, including the national insurance contribution increase, but also extending the energy profits levy on the profits that the energy giants are making, VAT on private schools, getting rid of the non-dom tax status, that meant that we're able to invest £29 billion extra a year in the National Health Service at the spending review. So I've made my choices. I will happily defend my choices. The spending review this week focused on the defence of our country, the National Health Service, and growing the economy. But if you look at the year to date, the economy has grown. In the first quarter of this year, we were the fastest growing economy in G7.
Well, it shrank again in April, but you mentioned...
But it was revised up for... But it was also revised up for previous months. Now, look, April was a very challenging month. It was the month when the President of the United States announced those tariffs. At that stage, we hadn't secured the trade deal with the US. Indeed, we hadn't secured the trade deals with India and the EU. So as a government, we are focused on growing our economy to make working people better off. That was the focus: defence, the health service, and growing our economy in the spending review last week. And that work continues. And it's not just about money. We're making planning reforms, regulatory reforms, pension reforms, are all focused on growing the economy and making working people better off.
And there are so many things we could discuss about the economy, and we'll hope that you'll come back and speak to us again soon about all of those important issues. But obviously we've been focusing on the Middle East because of what's happening today. Just on a final issue, one of the things that the government didn't really want to focus on was the idea of having a national inquiry into young girls being appallingly treated by grooming gangs. The Prime Minister suggested it was only sort of right-wingers who were trying to stir this up. People who wanted this to happen or raise the issue were sometimes even labelled as being racist. Was the Prime Minister simply wrong to dismiss the idea of having this big national inquiry? Because now he's going to have to, and he's announced it's going to happen.
We've never dismissed the concerns of victims, and those are the most important people in these discussions. When Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions, he took forward the first prosecutions in
when he was Prime
Rochdale.
Minister, he repeatedly refused the requests of people saying there has to be a national inquiry to clear this up once and for all.
Well, you know, the Conservatives could have done another national inquiry, but they didn't. We've been focused on implementing the recommendations of the Alexis J review and other reviews, because those recommendations had just been sitting on the table. But the Prime Minister wanted to assure himself he was doing everything that was necessary, which is why he asked Baroness Casey to do this rapid review. She said at the outset that she didn't think there was a need for a national inquiry, but during the course of her rapid review, she's concluded that a national inquiry alongside the local inquiries to give statutory powers is the right way forward. And the Prime Minister has preempted the publication of the report this week and said that he will accept the recommendations, including for a national inquiry alongside those local inquiries that have already got going.
So has Keir Starmer changed his mind about the fact that...
Well, I think Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, has always been really focused, as he was when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, on the victims, and not grandstanding, but actually doing the practical things to ensure that something like this never happens again, but also to ensure that the victims of this horrific abuse over many, many years is got to grips with, and that people have answers to their questions. That's been the focus of this Prime Minister and this government. We asked Louise Casey to do this piece of work to make sure that no stone was left unturned in the search for justice for the victims.
OK. Chancellor Rachel Reeves, thank you very much indeed for being with us on Sunday. And that report from Dame Louise Casey will be published tomorrow. Now, of course, remember, as ever, we want to know what you think. You can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk. If you're social media minded, you can use the hashtag #BBCLauraK, and the WhatsApp number is also there for you on the screen, 08000 282 161. And we'll hear from you perhaps later in the show and in our newsletter on Thursday. Let's then try and digest some of that with our panel here. Christiane, people might not have heard it on your microphone. You just said, phew. So what did you make?
Just because there's a lot to digest, as you said.
There is a lot to digest.
Yeah.
So let's start then with the Israeli ambassador. What did you make of what Tzipi Hotovely had to say this
I think
morning?
the absolute fact is that the whole world has always been concerned about Iran's nuclear ambitions. There was a moment of actual successful diplomacy which culminated in the JCPOA in 2015. In other words, the nuclear deal that was enshrined at the UN. Iran was declared totally in compliance of its responsibilities, even though the West did not lift all the sanctions as it should have done. What happened then? President Trump decided, under pressure from Bibi Netanyahu, who has never wanted these deals ever, he has always wanted to destroy Iran's capability, right? Under pressure from Netanyahu and then MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, he pulled out thinking he could do a better deal. He couldn't. He achieved nothing except Iran enriching to a higher degree. So Iran now has approximately 400 kilograms of enriched uranium to 60%. That is almost at breakout. It can easily go to 90% if it wants to, and that's 8 bombs. So people are very concerned. But there were these talks going on, and my reporting suggests that far from they didn't want to go to a deal, Iran was really wanting to go to a new deal. And just before these attacks, I heard that the head of the negotiation and the delegation was feeling optimistic about this round of talks.
The Iranian delegation.
Yes, the Iranian delegation, exactly.
Lord Brown, when you look at the decades of bitterness between these two countries, do you think it's possible that they might have been on the way to finding an accommodation?
I think it's possible. I mean, I was watching very carefully the earlier negotiations, and I knew the chief negotiator of the US one extremely well. And I think that it's very important to do this step by step. So we're now in a situation where they've got highly enriched uranium, probably not enough bomb quality, but someone has to now de-escalate it. I think if we don't de-escalate in some way, which is a combination of diplomacy and force, someone will make a mistake. And I think when the red mist goes above everyone's eyes, as they're very angry with each other, something bad happens.
What do you mean by that?
Well, someone just suddenly decides to attack someone because they think it's a good idea. Uncoordinated activity can happen, certainly if the chain of command isn't perfect.
You, listening to the Israeli ambassador, what went through your mind? Because Israel clearly does see Iran not coming clean about exactly what it's been doing. They have been told off this week, reported formally for the first time in 20 years by the International Atomic Authority as being in breach of the rules.
Well, it feels like they've been waiting for an opportunity, and the opportunity's presented itself, and they've taken it. And it's very concerning to me that we're sending jets out to support this when all the talk should really be of de-escalation. And indeed, if the Prime Minister, the government really wanted to show that they were serious about de-escalating in the Middle East, they should have been talking about stopping selling arms to Israel and even pulling back their training programs for the Israeli military.
Lord Brown?
So I think the issue here is, obviously the US is terribly important in this, Israel, Iran, but so too is the world. And somehow there has to be some accommodation of the world to push whether it's diplomacy or hard diplomacy or force, to get some sort of de-escalation. That's, I think, what's needed here.
I mean, in the spending review, the Foreign Office budget's been cut. I mean, that's where the diplomacy happens. The money's going on more arms and more bombs. That doesn't sound like the right priority.
The truth of the matter here is that the only people with actual heavyweight influence over Israel is the United States, right? And I think we absolutely do have to take a moment and say that President Trump, up until now, has failed on all the big foreign policy issues that he promised that he would solve, and quickly.
And he told voters he was going to end all wars,
but all
more
of
or
them.
less.
And guess what? They've got worse. And there is no leadership. He's hollowed out his negotiating teams, his foreign policy teams, his national security teams. It's all gut. It's all, I'll give them 60 days, and on day 61, we'll bomb them. Anybody knows that an actual negotiation takes months, if not years. That's what with the JCPOA was.
But Lord Brown, with the situation that we're in now in 2025, a lot of people would point to the international institutions we have trusted to sort these things out over many years and feel they've kind of been hollowed out. They don't work in the way that they used to. You've got an American president who doesn't believe in those international structures. So you know lots of the characters involved here in the region. What is the possibility?
But I think you have to create coalitions for purpose here. I think, a lot of the institutions have been broken up, effectively. And so now we're into the business of organising ourselves into coalitions of people who are powerful, saying you've got to stop this. And if you do, then something good will happen. I spent a lot of time in Iran in the way distant past. There's something about Iranians that actually they're very sophisticated, and I think they would like a better life. They wouldn't necessarily like to be associated with one power bloc or another, but I think they'd like a better life. And I think they would get that, and they understand if something could happen.
Just so I can say, that is absolutely correct, which is why Iranians have voted for relatively more moderate presidents, because they think that they will make a deal with the West to get the sanctions lifted and to enable them to have an actual relationship with the rest of the world. If you ask the Iranian people, they don't want any of this. They are,
and of course, it's very important to say the Iranian government and the Iranian people are not the same. The Iranian government repressed political criticism, and there have been all sorts of crackdowns on anybody trying to disagree with
But
it.
I think it's very important to ask about this why now, because as you pointed out to Ambassador Hotovely, the US intelligence does not say that it has noticed a weaponization, not now, and even I checked with the outgoing Biden administration, it didn't notice it then. So it really is a question of why Israel did it now, and it may be because of the amount of stockpile at 60%, which could be turned into 90%.
And Lord Brown, just as we're coming to an end of this discussion, but you mentioned there the different blocs. Now, we know now we are living in a world where the former boss of NATO called it the axis of authoritarian states. Russia and Iran, of course, have been dealing with each other. I know that you have met Vladimir Putin on many occasions.
Many.
What will he think at this moment? Does this help him? Does this give him opportunity?
Well, he will say two things, I think, as he said. One is, come with me and I'll stockpile your highly enriched uranium and I'll get it out the way for the world. On the other hand, come with me and get everyone off my patch, which is Ukraine. And so I think he's using this as he would as an incredibly clever negotiator, thinking through not just this present step, but 4 steps ahead. And you never get it on the first move. Never get it on the first move.
All three of you, thanks for now. We'll be back with you at the end of the programme. Well, this morning, Iran has said that Israel crossed a red line with its attacks. The two countries have continued to strike each other overnight. An oil depot in Tehran has been targeted, and you can see some of the images of that there, while at least 4 people were killed in an Iranian strike on Tamra, a city in the north of Israel. Well, the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has called Iran an enemy of the people, which has attempted terrorist attacks on UK soil. And she said Israel should not be condemned for trying to stop Iran getting nuclear weapons. Well, with us now this morning, the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Do you support, first of all, the government in their decision to send jets to the region?
Yes, I think it's the right thing. We've got assets out there in the UAE, in Oman, we've got Akratoria and Cyprus. They need to be protected, given that Iran has suggested that they may now be under threat. So I think it's the right thing to act in that way.
And what do you think of the action that Israel took attacking Iran?
So on the basis that we assume that they were getting close to producing a viable nuclear weapon, substantiated by the fact that they have withdrawn from cooperation from the IAEA and the UN and that kind of oversight and so on, that they're sitting on 60% enriched uranium, when for their civil nuclear purposes they would only need 2 or 3% or thereabouts. I think it is important that we make sure that Iran does not become a nuclear capable power.
But my question was, do you support what Israel has done? Attacking Iran's nuclear facilities,
so yes,
killing its military
on that
leadership.
basis, we cannot allow a situation where Iran is able to become a nuclear power, however many warheads they may be able to produce. That is something that would need to be stopped. It would be a present danger within the region and to the wider world, if that were to happen. But
there were meant to be diplomatic talks taking place today with that aim. Christiane has said the Iranians were even feeling positive about what that might have been able to achieve. So I just do want to press you for an explicit answer here. Do you support the action that Israel took to strike at Iran in this way?
So I think I've answered that, Laura. I've said that on the basis that the intelligence is that they were driving towards a nuclear device capable of doing what nuclear weapons can do and threatening their neighbours and so on, then I think it's quite reasonable to go in there and ensure that that does not happen.
But American intelligence said they're not building a nuclear weapon.
What we now need to do is to focus on de-escalation, because clearly quite outside of the nuclear aspects of this, the implications for oil prices, equity prices around the world, and indeed, given what may follow, an impact on trading and inflation and therefore interest rates and the general state of the world economy, it's very important that we do get de-escalation happening here.
That, of course, is why it's such a concern for people at home, not just looking at the loss of life and the tensions in the region, but this is something, if it's prolonged, could hit all of us in our pockets. On Friday, your leader, Kemi Badenoch, announced the Conservatives would get rid of the windfall tax on oil and gas companies. That, of course, leaves a hole in the books. Why should consumers have to fill that?
So what we need is a completely different economy, and we will put together what that will look like in the run-up to the next general election. We have plenty of time to do that. But can I just make a general point, which is that we should have a much stronger economy to lean into the kind of challenges that we're discussing this morning. And we haven't got that because this government took the wrong choices. So in coming to office, it loaded up taxes on businesses. That has destroyed growth and in part been passed on by higher prices, as has taxing and borrowing and spending vast amounts of money. That has kept inflation higher for longer, interest rates higher for longer. And then in terms of our national debt that they're adding to, of course, the servicing costs on that are now running at about 100 billion a year, which is twice what we spend on defence. So my point, Laura, is they've created a weak economy, which is, I'm afraid, going to probably find it quite difficult to handle what might now become.
But even as a Conservative, you have many times publicly acknowledged that your party also made really quite a mess of things. You didn't exactly leave a brilliant situation. You already had record levels of tax and record levels of debt. Things were not in a great situation. But I'm interested, you say
we had COVID, we had inflation imported through the Russia-Ukraine war, and we did on the day of the general election have inflation down to bang on target at 2%. It's almost double that now.
But you said, well, let's talk about what you want to do about it, though, because viewers have heard you and I discussed this on many occasions, and you said there you want a completely new kind of economy. Can you tell us one big radical thing that you would actually like to do if you made it to number 11?
So we've always spoken, for example, of welfare reform. What this government has actually been doing is putting welfare costs up, and it's likely to come forward with the retaining.
And so were you. So what is one radical thing that you would like to do?
Well, when we were in government, when I was Secretary of State at Department for Work and Pensions, as scored by the Office for Budget Responsibility, we made £5 billion worth of savings within the welfare budget. And the OBR said that as a consequence of the interventions that we came forward with, 450,000, almost 500,000 fewer people would be going on to long-term sickness benefits as a consequence. And we had plans to go still further. And we think it's right as a party that we shouldn't have people on welfare. We should have them going into work with support where necessary, of course, and the savings could be enormous. And those are the kind of things that then allow you to do a lot of other things like cutting taxes and growing the economy.
OK, well, for something truly radical, I think you're still keeping people guessing, Mel Stride, but I must just ask you briefly, do you welcome now the government has changed its mind and will hold a national inquiry into grooming gangs?
It's a very late decision. It should have happened far, far earlier. We've been calling this for many, many months, and Kemi Badenoch and Chris Philp and others have been derided by the Prime Minister, actually just hopping on some kind of far-right bandwagon and dog whistle politics and all the rest of it. That was the wrong response. But this is just another example of the Prime Minister being pressurised principally by us into U-turning in the same way as we've seen with the winter fuel payment means testing U-turn as well. And I'm afraid being a cork on the tide is not a good way to run our country. We really need somebody that's going to have more of a grip.
OK, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride, thank you very much indeed for being with us this morning on a very busy weekend when, of course, our focus has been on the events that are unfolding in front of our eyes in the Middle East. The brutal regime in Iran is not, of course, the same as the Iranian people. Opposition in that country has been repressed for many years. Women forced to cover their hair, political critics jailed and same-sex relationships banned, while the economy is in terrible shape. You might remember back in 2022, the frustrations of many thousands of people who took to the streets were met with force. So might this be a moment for those who want to overturn the regime? Reza Pahlavi is the son of the former Shah of Iran, and he told us this morning it's time for the population to rise up.
Well, since the initial strike, there's been a tremendous amount of activity, especially on behalf of the people who are in the streets and are obviously quite, I don't know what's the proper word to use here, but re-energized in the sense that this is maybe an opportunity now, seeing the regime being so weak and have weakened even more, especially with the practical decapitation of its force de frappe, it equals the playing fields for them. So I think, when you're dealing with a movement of civil disobedience and nonviolence against a very brutal regime, at some point the odds have to be shifting towards the people. I think people are sensing that right now. So there's a new wave of hope and energy that has been created as a result.
You have opposed the Iranian regime for a very long time, though. What evidence do you have that these strikes from Israel are actually stirring up more opposition?
Well, the Iranian people realize, and the world needs to realize, that the root cause of the problem has been the regime and its nature. And the only solution ultimately that will benefit both the Iranian people as well as the free world is for this regime to no longer be there. I've been arguing this point from the very beginning, that the ultimate solution is regime change. Now we have an opportunity because this regime is at its weakest point. There's a window in which we can operate and hopefully liberate our country, and the world can finally breathe a sigh of relief that they no longer have to fear nuclear threats, terrorism, radicalization, and so on and so forth.
Yet many Iranians, and certainly the regime, may see this as an attack without justification from another foreign country. Israel began this fresh outburst of conflict. Do you really think that Iranians, therefore, won't they be stirred up against Israel rather than the regime?
I think Iranians have seen that the world has been more than patient, giving this regime ample opportunity to come around and be reasonable, even in the spirit of negotiating a deal. We have seen as a result of the stubbornness of Ali Khamenei that he is solely responsible for what has now happened, that Iran should not have had come to this point. But what is the responsibility at the end of the day? It's that of Ali Khamenei. It is his war, not the Iranian people's war. So ultimately, anything that weakens the regime, anything that pushes more to its back is something that people welcome for obvious reasons, because they see that strangulation that holds them in that position beginning to loosen on their necks. This is something positive and not negative.
Are you actually saying then that Israel bombing your country, civilians in Iran being killed, is a positive thing?
I'm not saying that the targeting was meant to hurt the Iranian people. The targeting was meant to basically neutralize the regime threat. Clearly, I don't think that it was an intention of the Israeli government to attack Iranian civilians.
What do you think then will happen next to the regime? You say people have been in the streets calling for them to be overturned. What will happen next?
Well, as I said, I think as a result of the regime being decapitated and weakened more than ever, it's an opportunity for the Iranian people to finally liberate themselves, provided, of course, that this time the world doesn't sit idle and demonstrate vividly that beyond just imposing sanctions or what have you, they're prepared to take the next step of giving the Iranian people a sense of support for their fight for democracy and freedom. This has always been the expectation of the Iranian people, and I think the world now has an opportunity to see that through.
And what do you see your role being? Because, of course, your family used to run Iran. Is it your ambition to go back and lead the country perhaps one day? Is this actually a political opportunity for you?
Well, I have offered my role, and I've been on the record for the past 44 years of exactly what is my objective and what is my goal. And my goal is to see that Iran ultimately is rid of this clerical regime, and that the Iranian people determine their own future freely through the ballot box and a democratic process, a parliamentary process that will give the Iranian nation all the options once this regime has been toppled to decide for themselves. And my role there is very critical in terms of creating as much unity as possible so that we can work together towards that end and welcome all those who are now joining with us so they can be part of the solution as opposed to remain an obstacle and be part of the problem. I'm beginning to see that happening. I'm being contacted from elements from inside, particularly now from the military side, and I think that's a very important development.
Reza Pahlavi, thank you so much for joining us on a very busy day for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there could be a lot of turmoil ahead. Hugh, listening to all of the interviews and some that we've heard this morning, I just wonder, do you feel any more at ease or more worried?
Well, it's interesting hearing this interview from the son of the former Shah and comparing it to what was said in the earlier interview, the gentleman who clearly at some level or other represents the current Iranian regime. But I do think there's an international opportunity to widen this beyond the discussion. I mean, clearly de-escalation is a massive priority, but beyond the military actions here, and consider what the opportunities are here for the Iranian people. And you said just in the introduction to that the Iranian people are not the same as the Iranian government. And actually, just going back to what I mentioned Gaza at the very beginning, I think it's important to say also that the Israeli leadership doesn't represent the whole of the Israeli people by any means whatsoever. And there are many Israelis who are absolutely appalled by what their leader is doing. Certainly in Gaza, there may be a little more unity around Iran, but let's wait and see. Let's make sure we hear what the citizens of these countries are saying and not just their leaders.
You're right, there have been plenty of demonstrations, thousands of people in the streets protesting against Benjamin Netanyahu's policies. Christian, when you hear an opposition figure, an aspiring opposition figure like Reza Pahlavi talk about people in the streets in Iran, talk about potential uprisings, is that realistic, or do you think it might be wishful thinking? Because we should say to people, it's very hard to know what's going on in Iran. There's no free reporting.
Well, I mean, they have put out quite a lot on social media. I've been quite surprised. Look, it's going to be potentially difficult to rise up actually being in the streets while the bombs are falling and fighter jets, with missiles are coming down. But there is no doubt, and Pahlavi is right, and everybody who's reported it. I grew up under the Pahlavis in Iran, and the people, first of all, chose the Islamic Republic instead of them, but now have seen that the Islamic Republic is so much harsher, is so much more punitive, gives so much fewer rights, and is isolated from the world, and the economy is appalling, and it affects the people. So yes, I think from all my reporting, they want to change. He's the only one with name recognition, and whether it's for transitional or permanent leadership, I don't know what he wants, but he's considered the only one with any name recognition and any kind of support inside. He talked about the military. We know the Bazaris and people like that, potentially. But one thing to Hugh, and you have to say it, the people of Iran have been demonized and dehumanized, always associated with their leadership. The people of Gaza have been dehumanized and delegitimized. They don't want Hamas there. We've seen them on the streets under the hail of bombs. So it's not fair to have this collective punishment, and people should have their rights.
Lord Brown, finally to you on how this could evolve in terms of the effect here at home.
So I'd like to scoop it all up in one go and bring it back here. The spending review, energy security, net zero. It's my firm belief we need to really focus now and push very hard on energy security as a real objective, on net zero as the counterpart objective, getting more efficient, as the research that goes with it, and make sure that we actually deliver the projects which are put into the spending review. This is really important, and we can achieve a couple of objectives at once.
Are the government's plans credible?
Some of them are credible. The timing is always too bullish. It takes time to do lots of big projects. When I was working with the government, I kept saying, you've got to think about it. Get a grip on projects. Make sure you're realistic, not just accept what people say so that they can get into the queue. They can't. We've got to do lots of different things here.
I think that was a sceptical thumbs up. Is that a fair description?
Sceptical thumbs up.
And you're doing a waggly thumb on the side here.
I think the problem with the government's net zero plans is that they're not joined up. They're putting all the eggs in the energy basket. There's transport, there's housing, there's food and farming. They all need to play a key role in helping us towards net zero, and they're not there.
OK, and we need to say goodbye, sadly. Thank you to all three of you at the desk on a very busy morning here. Thank you to Christian Amanpour, Lord Brown and Hugh Farney-Whittingstall. Thank you to you, most of all, of course, for spending your Sunday morning with us as we've been trying to digest the huge events unfolding in a new conflict between old enemies. Latest news breaking this morning is Israel's military says it's sending evacuation notices in Persian to residents of Tehran living near targeted sites. Our teams, of course, at the BBC will be with you throughout the day, bringing you updates as they happen. I'll be with Paddy O'Connell shortly for Sunday's newscast. And remember, there are still reasons to be cheerful in this worrying world. Next week, Ray Fiennes will be with us, and I'll look forward to that and seeing you next Sunday. Same time, same place.